All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon. So Terence Crawford calls out Keith Thurman for a fight after Shawn Porter. And if I heard what he said right, he believes that the Keith Thurman fight may be bigger than the Errol Spence Jr. fight for him. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. So we are now shifting boxing off of the conversations about Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury, which is definitely a fight of the year candidate. I'm not big on saying that it is the fight of the year because there's other fights coming up, and I'm telling you, there is a fight coming up between Terence Crawford and Shawn Porter that very well may be just as good a fight as the Fury Wilder fight and may also compete, for fight of the year. And for me, it's a fight that I have been calling for a couple years, and I'm extremely happy that that is happening because of what it means for the welterweight division. Now, Terence Crawford was recently had his face-off with Shawn Porter, which really didn't get a lot of press because it was in the middle of what was going on with Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury. So a lot of the stuff that they talked about kind of went under the radar. But now with that passing, I think it'll be a good opportunity, to talk about that and to, start paying attention to that fight, because that fight, like I said, is a very, very high level fight with two very top level welterweights, and is going to answer a lot of questions about Terence Crawford. It's also going to answer a lot of questions about Shawn Porter. But one of the things that Terence Crawford talked about was, when he was being asked about, the obvious fight that a lot of people want to see, which is the Terence Crawford Errol Spence Jr. fight, is he talked about the Keith Thurman fight when he was asked what other fights were out there that could be big if he wasn't going to have the Errol Spence Jr. fight. And he said the Keith Thurman fight, right? And gave several reasons for why he thought that the Keith Thurman fight was a big fight. Now, I'm going to tell you guys now, I've been a critic of Terence Crawford for a while. Very, very rough on him, man. I had a lot of his people thinking that I was hating on him. A lot of Terence Crawford fans thought I was hating on him. What I was really doing, man, is really, I was sharing my mind and being honest, but at the same time, man, really trying to talk about Terence Crawford getting into a situation where he was fighting top-notch welterweights, because I thought it was unfair to say that Terence Crawford was a top welterweight and deserved more credit than Errol Spence Jr. when Errol Spence Jr. was pretty much fighting all the tough guys at welterweight, and Terence Crawford had not done that yet. But with this fight with Shawn Porter being locked down and set, I'm ready to move on, man, and just kind of consider the welterweight division for what it is, because now there is no side of the streets. Early on there was conversation where Errol Spence Jr. used the unfortunate phrase, the other side of the street. Like, Errol Spence was going to take care of his side of the street, Terence Crawford takes care of his side of the street, and then the two meets. But now the situation that exists between the PBC and Top Rank, there doesn't seem to be sides of the street. You have a fight, just last weekend between Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury that was a Top Rank versus PBC fight. Shawn Porter versus Terence Crawford is a PBC Top Rank fight, and Bob Arum himself was interviewed and was talking about how he believes moving forward that both the PBC and Top Rank have found that it makes more sense for these guys to work with each other than for them to battle each other, right? So that they can both make good fights and have both networks available to both fighters, right? So in this particular fight, I do believe that Shawn Porter, who's a PBC fighter, is going to be fighting on an ESPN pay-per-view, and Deontay Wilder, who was a PBC fighter, or Top Rank, Tyson Fury, who's a PBC fighter, was just fought on a co-fight with Fox. So now that is all by the wayside, I hope it's by the wayside. Now we can look at Terence Crawford and say, okay, well, what fights? If he's able to get past Shawn Porter, and ain't no guarantee he's going to get past Shawn Porter. Ain't no guarantee at all. I don't believe that there's a rematch clause in there. No guarantee that he can get past Shawn Porter. I'm favoring him to get past Shawn Porter, but there's no guarantee he's going to get past Shawn Porter, because Shawn Porter is a very, very tough fight. But after that, it is a reasonable question to say to Terence Crawford, who are you going to fight next? Now, if you look at what's going on with Errol Spence Jr., Errol Spence Jr. versus Terence Crawford is probably not going to happen next for Terence Crawford anyway. So, the question about whether, Keith Thurman is a bigger fight than the Errol Spence Jr. fight for Terence Crawford, I think is a moot point. And I mean, irregardless is not a word. Regardless of what Terence Crawford meant by that. Terence Crawford could have meant it was a bigger fight in that it's just as difficult an opponent, right? And that Keith Thurman had beaten all of the guys at welterweight other than, when he came out of a very long layoff against Manny Pacquiao. So, that Keith Thurman is just as proven a fighter as Errol Spence Jr. at welterweight. I mean, that's what Terence Crawford could have meant. He could have meant proven, in that as far as his status, and it would be just as good a fight to take as the Errol Spence Jr. fight. He could have meant that, but if he meant monetarily as big, I think that is obviously a little bit naive to say that it is as monetarily as big because of the fact that Errol Spence Jr. has AT&T Stadium. And AT&T Stadium, those guys are going to fill that stadium up, and that's just not a situation that Keith Thurman has. Keith Thurman doesn't really have a home base, right? He's somebody that fight. Those two guys would probably fight in Vegas, and I don't think that you can guarantee as big a gate. And also, Keith Thurman hasn't had a win in about 4 years, right? And I think that's a reasonable thing to say. That's not true, because he had a fight against Josecito Lopez right before he lost to Manny Pacquiao. But so I'll revise that amend that to say that Keith Thurman hasn't had a big win in about 4 years. Probably not a big win since he fought Danny Garcia before a virtual 2-year layoff, right? But seeing as Errol Spence Jr. is not going to go straight into a fight with Terence Crawford, there was an interview that took place where the PBC on Fox their YouTube channel interviewed Derek James, who's the trainer for Errol Spence Jr. And he alluded to, he refused to get pinned down on it, but he alluded to the fact that Errol Spence Jr. was going to go back to fighting the guy he was supposed to fight before Manny Pacquiao took the fight with Errol Spence Jr., and that was Yordenis Ugas. So Errol Spence Jr. more than likely is going to come back in probably the middle of next year, I would suspect is when he's going to come back and probably fight Yordenis Ugas. Seeing as the fight with Terence Crawford is and Shawn Porter is in November, then if they have that fight and Terence Crawford gets past that fight, he might be able to squeeze a fight in with Keith Thurman around the same time that Errol Spence Jr. fights Yordenis Ugas. And that is subject to the WBA allowing that fight to happen, because the fight between Yordenis Ugas and Errol Spence Jr. to happen, because they ordered like a little mini tournament between Yordenis Ugas and Stanosis and Jamal James versus another guy whose name I can't recall. So, considering everything that's going on with the WBA and going on with Errol Spence Jr., I would take it, man. I would love that fight. And because I think that Keith Thurman probably should be able to get back in the mix and at the championship level. I would love to see it, if Keith Thurman could take a tune-up fight before fighting Terence Crawford. But if he can't get one in, he's a seasoned fighter. Maybe he'd be ready to go. But if Terence Crawford were to be able to get through Shawn Porter, then get through Keith Thurman at welterweight, and then lead into an Errol Spence Jr. fight, I think that would be absolutely great. And also depending on what happened, Terence Crawford brought up, that he doesn't even really know whether Errol Spence Jr. was going to be the same or not, when he returns. I think that is also a moot point, man, because it doesn't matter if he's got the belts, and he's got two of them. He's got the IBF and he's got the WBC belt. If he's there with the belts, you should still fight him, man. And I have a suspicion that Errol Spence Jr. is going to be just as good as he was, before the eye injury, because the eye injury is not going to keep him from training. I think the eye injury is just a question whether he's susceptible to further injury. You know what I mean? But anyway, that's my take on the situation. You let me know in the comment section what you think. And with that, I'm out. Deuces.